Marcus's smirk turned into a grin. Someone who doesn't fit your mold. Someone who's not conventionally beautiful by your standards, who comes from a completely different world. And here's the catch. You'd have to stay married for 6 months. No tricks, no loopholes. Edward set his glass down, his mind already racing. He saw the challenge for what it was, a game, an opportunity to prove his superiority. The terms were absurd, but that only made the prospect more enticing. "And what's in it for me?" Edward asked. Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. "If you succeed, I'll personally invest $50 million into Carter Enterprises, no strings attached. But if you fail, well, let's just say your reputation as the man who always wins will take a serious hit." Edward smirked, his confidence unshaken. "You're on." The conversation shifted, but the bet lingered in Edward's mind. He prided himself on his ability to win any game, and this one, though unconventional, would be no different. He would find someone, marry her, and prove that no matter the circumstances, Edward Carter always came out on top. Over the next week, Edward set his team into motion. His personal assistant, Samantha, discreetly compiled a list of potential candidates, women who were far removed from Edward's world, yet fit the criteria Marcus had laid out. Edward scanned the profiles with a detached curiosity, each name and face feeling like another deal to be negotiated. Then he saw her, Amara James. She stood out immediately, not because she fit his ideal, but because she defied it in every way. A 36-year-old black woman with a full, curvaceous figure, Amara was a social worker who ran a non-profit organization dedicated to helping underserved communities. She had no ties to high society, no interest in luxury, and a fiery reputation for standing her ground. Edward smirked. She would do. He arranged a meeting under the guise of discussing a potential partnership with her nonprofit. When Amara walked into his office, Edward was struck by her presence. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her natural curls framing a face that was warm yet unyielding. She was dressed simply but professionally, a stark contrast to the polished perfection of the women Edward was used to. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending a hand, "thank you for reaching out. I wasn't expecting a man of your stature to take an interest in our work." Her words, though polite, carried a subtle challenge. Edward smiled, masking his own intrigue. "Miss James, I believe in supporting meaningful causes. Your work caught my attention." The meeting proceeded, with Amara explaining her nonprofit's mission and the struggles they faced in securing funding. Edward listened, feigning interest while mentally calculating how best to present his proposition. When the conversation shifted, Edward leaned forward, his tone shifting to one of quiet authority. "Amara, I have a proposal for you, one that could provide your organization with the resources it desperately needs." Her eyes narrowed slightly, her skepticism evident. "What kind of proposal?" Edward smiled. "Marry me." The room fell silent. Edward explained the terms carefully, omitting the true nature of the bet. He framed the marriage as a mutually beneficial arrangement. She would gain the funding and visibility her nonprofit needed, and he claimed it would help improve his public image. Amara's expression remained unreadable as she listened. Edward knew she was weighing her options. She was intelligent and cautious, qualities he found both frustrating and intriguing. "I'll need time to think about it," she finally said. Edward nodded, though he knew he had already planted the seed. people always came around when the stakes were high enough. As Amara left his office, Edward felt a surge of satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place, and soon the game would begin. Little did he know the challenge he had so confidently embraced would unravel his carefully constructed world in ways he could never have anticipated. A millionaire marries a plus-sized woman as part of a bet, but what he discovers changes him forever. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories, and let us know in the comments which city you're from. Edward Carter sat in his luxurious penthouse high above the glittering lights of Manhattan, a crystal glass of whiskey in hand. The world below seemed small and insignificant, a reflection of how he viewed most people. At 43, Edward was a self-made billionaire, the CEO of Carter Enterprises, and the epitome of success in the world of high finance. He had everything a man could desire: wealth, power, and influence. Yet, beneath his tailored suits and polished image lay an unshakable arrogance, built on years of unchallenged dominance. Edward's social circle mirrored his personality: elitist, self-congratulatory, and deeply insulated from the realities of everyday life. Tonight, he was hosting one of his infamous cocktail parties, where the city's most powerful and affluent mingled. Expensive champagne flowed freely, laughter echoed through the luxurious space, and conversations revolved around investment deals, extravagant vacations, and the occasional mockery of those outside their exclusive world. As Edward moved effortlessly through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries and basking in admiration, his longtime friend and occasional rival, Marcus Whitman, cornered him by the marble bar. "Still the same, Edward," Marcus said with a smirk, swirling his wineglass. "Always the man with the perfect life?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "Would you expect anything less?" Marcus chuckled. "Not at all. But tell me, don't you ever get tired of it? The same parties, the same people, the same everything?" Edward took a sip of his whiskey and leaned against the bar. "Tired? Hardly. Why change something that works?" Marcus's smirk widened, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "You're too predictable, Edward. You've built an empire, sure, but you've also built walls so high that no one can surprise you anymore. Don't you ever crave a challenge?" Edward tilted his head, intrigued but wary. "What kind of challenge?" Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. "A real challenge. Something outside your world of control. Something or someone you can't buy, manipulate, or dominate." Edward laughed, the sound sharp and confident. "There's no such thing." "Oh, I think there is," Marcus said, straightening. "In fact, I'll bet you on it." The word bet caught Edward's attention like a hook. He was competitive to a fault, and Marcus knew it. Edward's life was a series of calculated victories, each one reinforcing his belief that he could conquer any obstacle. "What's the bet?" Edward asked, his tone casual, but his interest piqued. Marcus gestured toward the room, where guests mingled in their designer outfits, sipping vintage wine. "We both know you have a type, Edward. Young, beautiful, refined women who fit perfectly into this world of yours. But what if I told you to marry someone who's the complete opposite?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "Define opposite."